Hey everyone, ready for another deep dive? We're tackling something pretty relevant today. The potential TikTok ban in the US and the rise of this app RedNote.
Yeah, it's been interesting to see this unfold.
Yeah, we've even seen people joking about saying goodbye to their Chinese spies. But as we'll see, this whole situation is way more complicated than that.
Definitely. It's not just about funny memes this time.
Right.
There are some pretty big questions we need to think about, like digital freedom and data privacy, and even how we connect online in the future,
It's kind of wild how a simple app download can lead to all of that.
Yeah, for sure. So let's start with TikTok. The US might ban it because of data security and the potential for the Chinese government to access user data.
Okay, so that's the backdrop. And in the middle of all this, we have RedNote, or Xiaohongshu as it's known in China, suddenly becoming super popular.
Right, especially with people who are looking for a replacement for TikTok.
Gotcha. So is RedNote just another TikTok? What makes it different?
Well, on the surface, it looks pretty similar. Short-form videos, influencer culture, a focus on lifestyle content,
Right.
But RedNote is really deeply rooted in Chinese culture. I mean, even the interface and the terms and conditions are mostly in Mandarin.
Whoa, hold on. So you're telling me people are signing up for this without really understanding what they're agreeing to?
Yeah, it's a little concerning, especially considering all the worries about data privacy with TikTok.
Big time. And on top of that, RedNote's already huge in China.
Oh yeah, over 300 million active users.
And unlike TikTok, RedNote is totally allowed in China.
Yep, even the government has access.
Wow. So we have American users potentially moving to a platform that's embedded in a completely different culture with different internet rules.
It's a pretty unique situation.
And what kind of impact could that have on users?
Well, one of the most interesting things is the cultural exchange that's happening.
Like what?
So imagine you're an American user, you log onto RedNote, and you're greeted with requests from Chinese users to see your cats.
Wait, seriously? Like a cat tax?
Exactly. It's actually pretty adorable.
I love it.
And it goes beyond cats. Chinese users are asking Americans all sorts of questions about life in the US. Healthcare costs, the National Guard, property taxes, you name it.
That's fascinating.
And of course, Americans are curious about life in China too. Daily life, cultural differences, perceptions of Americans.
What are they saying?
Well, one example that stuck with me was a user from Florida asking what Chinese people think about Florida.
Interesting.
Some responses were like mistranslations about Florida not supporting idle people. And then others were saying things like Florida doesn't breed boring folks.
That's hilarious. So even with all this serious stuff about data and censorship, there's this genuine cultural exchange going on.
Exactly. It shows just how complex and kind of contradictory the digital world is.
Right.
We have this potential for connection and understanding, but it's happening within a framework that might also compromise our digital freedom.
It's a tricky balance for sure. So we've touched on these concerns about data privacy and censorship. Let's dig a little deeper. What are the actual risks with RedNote?
I think the biggest concern is data collection. We just don't know how RedNote handles user data or if they're sharing it with the Chinese government.
Yeah, it's like we're having this fun cultural exchange, but there's this looming question about what's happening with our data in the background.
Exactly. And then there's content moderation too. RedNote operates under China's internet regulations, which are way stricter than in the US.
So what kind of content gets censored?
It's tough to say for sure, but anything critical of the Chinese government or touching on sensitive topics is probably fair game for censorship.
That's a big deal for people used to the freedom of platforms like TikTok.
Totally. It makes you think, are we willing to give up some of our online freedom for the sake of convenience and connection?
That's a tough question.
Yeah.
You mentioned earlier that RedNote is really rooted in Chinese culture. Can you talk about that more? Like, how does that shape the platform?
Well, one thing is the focus on community and shared values.
Okay.
RedNote promotes this feeling of collective identity, which is a big part of Chinese culture.
So how does that play out in the app?
For one thing, content moderation is much more community-driven. Users are encouraged to report anything that goes against community guidelines, which often reflect those broader societal values.
That's really different from platforms like Facebook or Twitter, where it's all about the company making those decisions.
Absolutely. And this community-based approach has its pros and cons.
How so?
Well, on the one hand, it creates a sense of shared responsibility, but it can also lead to self-censorship and fewer different viewpoints being allowed.
That's like a catch-22.
Yeah.
You belong, but you might not be able to speak your mind.
Right. And that's the dilemma with platforms like RedNote. On the surface, they're fun and you can connect with people from different cultures. But underneath, there are these issues with data privacy, censorship, and even subtle manipulation.
It's a reminder that we need to be careful about just jumping into new tech without thinking about the bigger picture. We have to be smart about what we consume online.
I agree. And this goes beyond just RedNote. This is a conversation we need to be having about all social media platforms.
Yeah, it's not like American companies are perfect either.
Not at all. The truth is, algorithms have a huge impact on what we see and read and what we end up believing.
You've mentioned algorithms a few times. Can you break that down for our listeners? How do they shape our online experience?
Sure. So algorithms are basically sets of rules that determine what you see on social media.
Okay.
They look at things like what you've done before, what you're interested in, and even where you are to personalize your feeds.
So it's all about keeping us hooked.
That's part of it.
Yeah.
But algorithms can also be used to push certain narratives or viewpoints.
Oh, wow. Like how?
Well, let's say with RedNote, the algorithms could be designed to prioritize content that agrees with the Chinese government or downplays sensitive topics.
So you're not being told what to think, but the information you see is being controlled.
Exactly. And that can be really effective, especially on a platform that's designed to keep you engaged.
This is starting to sound a little scary. It's like we're giving control of our minds to these algorithms.
It's not quite that extreme, but it is important to be aware of the potential for manipulation. We need to be critical thinkers and question the information we're seeing.
So what can we do about it? Are we just stuck?
Not at all. We have more power than we think. We can start by demanding transparency from social media companies. We need to know how their algorithms work and how our data is being used.
It's like we need to learn how to speak the language of the internet so we can protect ourselves.
Exactly. And we can be selective about the platforms we use. We can choose ones that respect our values, prioritize privacy, and encourage open discussion.
So it's not about deleting all our accounts, but about being more thoughtful about our online activity.
Right. And we can use our voices to push for change. We can support groups fighting for a better internet and contact our representatives to advocate for stronger data protection laws.
So taking our offline activism online, basically making sure technology works for us, not the other way around.
That's the idea. This whole RedNote thing is a wake-up call. It shows the complicated choices we have to make online and how important it is to be informed, engaged, and active in shaping the future of the internet.
This has been super insightful. You've given us so much to think about. I'm sure you have one last question for us before we wrap up.
Yeah.
Yeah, it really makes you stop and think, it's so easy to get caught up in the latest app, but we really need to think about the consequences.
Yeah, I think RedNote is a good example. It shows that even something that seems harmless can have a big impact on us and even on society as a whole.
So how do we make sure our digital future is one where we have freedom of expression and privacy and, all those democratic values?
Well, I think the first step is to be more careful about the information we consume online. We can't just believe everything we see. We need to be critical thinkers and question where the information is coming from and look for different perspectives.
It's almost like we need to be a little skeptical of the digital world. Not like cynical or anything, but just approach it with a critical eye.
Exactly. And part of that is understanding how these platforms actually work. We need to learn about algorithms and data collection and how people try to manipulate public opinion online. The more we know about these things, the better we can protect ourselves.
Knowledge is power, right? But it's not enough to just know. We have to do something with that knowledge. What can we do to be more proactive about shaping the digital world?
There are a few things we can do. We can support organizations that are fighting for digital rights and a more open internet. We can contact our elected officials and ask for stronger laws to protect our data and our online freedom. And we can choose to use platforms that share our values.
So it's about taking that awareness and actually doing something with it, both individually and collectively.
Right. It's about using our voices and our choices to create a digital world that reflects what we believe in. It's about demanding transparency and accountability from tech companies and governments. And it's about working together to build a more fair and just digital future for everybody.
This has been a really eye-opening deep dive. We've talked about everything from cat memes to cultural exchanges to some really big questions about freedom and responsibility in the digital age. I think this has given our listeners a lot to think about and a lot to do.
I hope so. And remember, this is just the start of the conversation. There's so much more to explore, and I encourage everyone to keep learning, questioning, and talking about these important issues about the future of the internet.
Thanks for joining us, everyone. We hope you learned something new and feel like you can make a difference in the digital world. Remember, the internet is what we make it. Let's make it something amazing.
Listen up, y'all gather round. Talking stocks and profits found. From Wall Street to Main Street too. We're breaking down the money move. Mad Money Podcast, where the knowledge flows. Investing insights as the markets grow. Tune in, turn up, and get ready to thrive. Mad Money Pod's your financial survival guide. Mad Money Pods is where the knowledge flows. Investing insights as the markets grow. Tune in, turn up, and get ready to thrive. Mad Money Pod's your financial survival guide. Mad Money Pods is where the knowledge flows. Investing insights as the markets grow. Listen up, y'all gather round. Talking stocks and profits found. From Wall Street to Main Street too. We're breaking down the money move. Mad Money Podcast, where the knowledge flows. Investing insights as the markets grow.